Hi, I'm Mordechai Becher. Welcome to Dimensions of the Daf on the Jewish Broadcasting Service, in which we examine ideas from the Torah, from the Talmud, from the Mishnah, from classic Jewish texts every episode. And I appreciate people watching, and especially when I get shout-outs when I give lectures in different locations, and people say, oh, I saw you on JBS, and I saw you on Dimensions of the Daf, and I love the program, etc. I always get a big thrill out of that. So I was just recently in Lawrence, Long Island, at a synagogue there, scholar in residence, and there were a bunch of people who said they saw me on Dimensions of the Daf, and that was a pleasure. And I spoke recently in Brooklyn, and someone else said that they saw me there, and I hope to be in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania pretty soon. I think there are some people there who watch, and Queens on Sunday, and I know that there are people there who have watched me. So anyway, a shout out to all of you. Now, I'd like to speak today about Mezuzah. If we look at Deuteronomy chapter 6, a very famous part of the Torah, Deuteronomy chapter 6 discusses the obligation, Hear, O Israel, Lord is our God, Lord is one. This is the famous Shema Yisrael. And there it says the following: you shall love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And then it says this: these words, in other words, these ideas, which I command you to this day, what are you supposed to do with them? So it says this: first of all, they shall be in your heart. Okay? Incorporate these words into your heart. And number one. Number two, teach them diligently to your children. In other words, teach them to your children. Transmit the words of Torah to your kids. Number three, talk of them when you sit down in your house, when you walk by the way. So you should engage in talking about these words, these ideas. This should be part of your conversation. When you lie down, when you get up. In other words, you should recite these words in the morning and in the evening. And then it says, bind them as a sign upon your hand. We call this tefillin, and a frontlet or ornament between your eyes. So we have this idea that you're supposed to write these words. We put them, I'm not going to talk about that today, but in these square leather boxes, which you're supposed to tie onto your arm, symbolic of action, and onto your head, symbolic of thought, and a line between your eyes, symbolic of senses. So the words of Torah should encompass you. And then, and this is what I bold-faced, and you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and your gates, which is in Hebrew, uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha, write them on the doorposts of your gate and house. The word mezuzah in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, actually means the doorpost. So a doorpost is, in Hebrew, mezuzah. It's just that since the Torah commands us to write the words of Torah on our doorpost, and the thing we use is this parchment which we put on the doorpost, the parchment itself that we put on the doorpost became known as a mezuzah. So, and that's what everyone has been calling it for approximately 2,200 years. In other words, a long time. But really mezuzah means the doorpost. It actually, some say, comes from the word zuz. In Hebrew, that means move. The place which is where you move through, the transit point from inside to outside, one room to the other, is called the mezuzah, the place of movement. Or some say it refers to the movement of the door. The door is attached to the doorpost, it moves in and out, back and forth, so hence it's called mezuzah from the Hebrew word zuz. But either way, be that as it may, the Torah in Deuteronomy 6 and 11 commands us to write these words on the doorposts of our home. The only other place, by the way, there's two other places, but the one other place where the doorpost is mentioned is, of course, when the Jews were about to leave Egypt. And it's the night before we leave Egypt, the night of the plague of the firstborn. The Jews take a lamb and slaughter it and roast it whole and eat this meal together. It's called the Paschal Lamb. And we take blood from that and put it on the doorposts of our homes. And very famously, God says, I will see the blood on the doorposts and pass over the homes of the Jews and smite the Egyptian firstborn. This is very interesting. So it was I guess, a way of signaling my faith in God and signaling my membership in the Jewish people. Now, if you look at the next slide, I actually have the Hebrew text of the mezuzah, and like the Torah scroll and tefillin, a mezuzah has to be written in a very specific script. This is known as Ktav Ashurit, which means Assyrian script. Has its origins in Assyria, but it's a Hebrew script, and it has very, very specific formats. It's not exactly, doesn't exactly look like the script you might be used to in modern Hebrew printing or writing, but that is the traditional script of the Torah scroll, and it must be written with total precision. No mistakes, no rubbed out letters, no letter touching each other, with absolute precision, and it contains in it the Shema. Now, it is supposed to be written on parchment. Now, parchment, most of you do not use parchment anymore. We use paper. But parchment is, as you can see on the next slide, is made from animal skins. So when an animal is killed, this is what your shoes are made of leather, or your leather jacket, or your belt, or your handbag, or your pocketbook, etc. These are all made from the skins of animals. So you can see on the top left there, after the animal is killed, we take the skin off, and there it's got fur. Of course, sometimes the fur is left on if you have Ugg boots. Sometimes the fur is scraped off. In the case of parchment, obviously the fur gets scraped off, and the other side, which is where the flesh is, that gets scraped off. And then you have a thinner piece of leather. What happens is that is then immersed in certain chemicals. This is called the process of tanning. One of the chemicals, tannic acid. So it's immersed in these chemicals, which actually softens the leather and also preserves it, and gets rid of the traces of meat and stuff like that. Then, as you can see on the bottom left, it's stretched on racks so that it will dry and be a very, very smooth surface. Otherwise, you'll not be able to write on it. Writing on your leather jacket might be difficult. Writing on parchment is easy. And then it is cut, as you see on the bottom right, into pieces of parchment. Then, all the way on the right, what happens is you've got a square piece of parchment, and then you etch into it lines to guide the writing so that the writing will be nice and even and level. And that is the next stage in the production. Then, the mezuzah must be written also like a Torah scroll and tefillin with special ink which only contains kosher ingredients, ink which is a nice deep black color, and ink which is indelible, that cannot be easily fade or scraped off. So the traditional recipe for the ink I've got here: 3 grams of gum arabic, 3 grams of gold nuts, 1 gram of vitriol, iron or copper sulfate, 1/4 liter of water, and basically you crush the gall nuts into a fine powder, mix all the ingredients together, cook it on an open flame until the residue is left, strain out the larger lumps of gall nut, and leave it for 6 months, and it turns a deep, deep black. And that black ink is also indelible, and it's very hard. It doesn't fade. I mean, eventually, everything fades eventually, but it stays for a long time. And then the scribe writes it with a special pen. Usually, he uses either, as you can see there, some use a feather, or some just use a reed or bamboo, which is cut specially so that you dip it in the ink and you write it with the special ink. So this is a traditional. We like to do things in the traditional way. It cannot be printed. It has to be done with human intention. The person who writes it has to have in mind that he's writing it for the sake of the mitzvah of mezuzah. He writes the name of God. He has to look at that name with holiness. And so, a computer cannot do that. So you have to have a human being, known in Hebrew as a sofer, a scribe, and he writes this in a very specific way. So no mistakes can be made. It must be written with special ink, on special parchment, with a special quill or pen, by a person who's trained to do this, who can write very nicely, who has in mind the proper intentions when he writes it, and obviously that's why mezuzah does not cost like $2.99. If it was just printed, I could do it for about 10 cents a mezuzah. It's obviously not printed. The fact that it's parchment, the fact that it's special ink, the fact that it requires a skilled artisan to produce it, and it's a slow process, means that it will be expensive. We're talking about probably mean price $30 for a mezuzah or something like that, but I guess it depends also If it's a really tiny mezuzah, it's going to be expensive. It's almost like there's a curve, right? Really tiny mezuzahs, expensive, because to make a very tiny mezuzah kosher, very, very difficult. Really large ones, also expensive. The ones which are in the medium range, which is not too huge and not tiny, those are the medium range of price as well. So now, the mezuzah is placed on the door. Where is it placed? Where on the door is it placed? So it is placed on the top or the bottom of the upper third of the door. Okay, so you've got a door divided into three, let's say. So the bottom of the top third of the door. In other words, it should be around eye level. It should be somewhere obvious, and it's supposed to be on the outside of the door. There are differences here between Ashkenaz, German or European Jews, and Sfarad, or the Jews of Spain and the Middle East. The Sephardi Jews have the mezuzah vertical on the doorpost, and Ashkenazi Jews, European Jews, usually have it as at an angle on the doorpost. I will not get into the technical reasons for that, but it's based on an argument in the Talmud or post-Talmud as to what is the correct placement. In any way, it is placed on that part of the door on the right-hand side when you are entering. And there's a special blessing which we say as we put the mezuzah on. We say a blessing beforehand. Blessed are you, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us in his commandments and commanded us to affix the mezuzah. If you're putting on multiple mezuzahs, you say one blessing for all the house. By the way, which doors need a mezuzah? If it's any regular room needs a mezuzah, front door, back door. Although, if the room is a toilet or bathroom, we do not put a mezuzah on that room. If it's a very tiny closet, we don't put a mezuzah on that because it's not really a room. But generally, other rooms we do put a mezuzah on. If you live on a houseboat, I don't know how many, but it could be. If you live on a houseboat, then you would put a mezuzah on the doors of the houseboat. If you, I don't know, that's pretty much where you put the mezuzah. If you have an office where you work in and you own the office, if you have a store, then people put a mezuzah there as well. So what are some of the ideas behind the mezuzah? So that was all technical information. Maimonides tells us the following very, very beautiful text here. It's Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah, which you've got in front of you. He says this: every time a person enters or leaves his house and notes the mezuzah on the doorpost, he will encounter the unity of the name of the Holy One, blessed be he. In other words, Shema Yisrael is written there. Hear, O Israel, Lord is our God, Lord is one. So he understands, he thinks about the unity of God. He'll remember his love. He will wake up from his slumber and his obsession with the frivolities of the moment. In other words, hopefully, it'll just make him aware that there's more to life than the next cheeseburger. Well, kosher, whatever. He will realize that there is nothing that exists eternally except for the knowledge of the Rock of Ages. God is called the Rock of Ages, the eternal rock. And he will understand that the only really thing of value is those things which are eternal, and the only thing which is eternal is the intellectual, spiritual, moral and ethical knowledge of God. Immediately, he'll turn to the contemplation of the truth and walk in the path of the just. So Maimonides sees the mezuzah as a reminder of truth, a reminder of the unity of God, a reminder of why we're here in this world. And the sages said, anyone who has tefillin on his head and arm, those are the boxes I told you about before, tzitzit on his clothing, these fringes, and a mezuzah on his door, is assured that he will not sin, for he has many reminders. They are the very angels that save him from sinning, because the verse says the angel of God camps around the person. So Maimonides understands that angels doesn't actually mean these white things with wings flapping, etc., and halos. What it means is that the commandments that we do, like the mezuzah itself, that's an angel, meaning it's a message from God to remind us of something, to command us about something. Nachmanides has a slightly different view. Nachmanides says Maimonides was around the early 12th century. Nachmanides was the early 13th century. He was 10 years old when Maimonides died. Nachmanides lived in Gerona. Maimonides lived in Cairo most of his life. Nachmanides lived in Gerona and Barcelona in Spain, or Castilla. Anyway, Nachmanides writes the following: one who buys a mezuzah for 1 zuz, that was the Talmudic currency, you buy a mezuzah for $10, he puts it in his doorway and thinks about it, its purpose. As soon as you think about it for a second, you've already acknowledged creation, God's knowledge and involvement in the world, prophecy, and you have belief in all the foundations of the Torah. In addition, you've acknowledged the great kindness of God in taking our ancestors out of slavery in Egypt. In other words, Nachmanides sees the mezuzah as a means to acknowledge the basic beliefs of Judaism. The belief that God exists, the belief that he created the world, the belief that he is one, the belief there is divine providence, reward and punishment, the belief that he took us out of Egypt. All of these are right there in the mezuzah and in its placement. So he says, it's a bargain. That's what Nachmanides is saying. It's a bargain. For 10, 20, $30, or he says 1 zuz, I guess there's been some inflation since then. I mean, it's a long time. But he says for that, you get a bargain in which you are acknowledging literally all of these various beliefs. So that is one idea. And the Rabbi Mordechai says a similar idea. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, who was a 19th century rabbi in Germany, he has a bit of a different understanding, and he says the following. He says, we should write the biblical passages on the entrance of every house, thereby hallowing the house. Hallowing means sanctifying the house, and indeed every place specially set aside for human activities, as an abode where God is ever present, where the service of God is fulfilled. Rav Hirsch is saying, by putting the mezuzah on the door, what we're saying is, you are in a holy place. Our home is holy. We don't believe that holiness and service of God is only in the synagogue. We believe that you can serve God equally in the home. If your home is a place of kindness, hospitality, justice, prayer, study of Torah, etc., then it's a place of holiness. So he says, testifying that all one's life and all that one endures is accomplished through God, even the home that you built, the home that you bought, the home that you owe mortgage on, etc. All this happens to you in life, all comes from God. That's the lesson of mezuzah. He says it teaches us also the meaning that domestic life and dedicates your house as a temple of God. In fact, there's a letter by Rav Hirsch. He once said he wished he could have closed down all synagogues for 1 month to teach people the central idea that God can not only be found in the synagogue, but can be found in your home as well. And the mezuzah signifies that idea. When you enter your house, he says, put your hand on the mezuzah. Remind yourself that you are treading upon consecrated ground. When you leave your house, put your hand on the mezuzah and commit your house to the protection of God to whom it's dedicated. There is a common custom, by the way, which is actually mentioned in the Code of Jewish Law, that when you enter and leave, you put your hand on the mezuzah. It's not a law, you don't have to do this, and you don't have to kiss it, but it's a common thing to people just to put their hand on it. Some people just look at it. You can blow it a kiss if you want, if it's really high. But basically, it's a reminder. So Rav Hirsch takes it. So we've got Maimonides, who says it's to get you to contemplate important things and put aside the trivial. Nachmanides says it's an acknowledgement of the beliefs, the basic beliefs of Judaism. Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch says it's a way of sanctifying your house and understanding that the service of God is not something which starts and finishes in the synagogue or in the temple or anywhere else, but rather it can be done primarily, or is done primarily in the home, and the home can be a holy place as well. And then we have Rivka Dalia of Lunchitz, who actually has a very interesting idea. He says that it's a physical symbol of God's protection and divine providence over individual homes. But also, he says, when we enter our home, we are reminded by it to struggle against the impulses towards wrong conduct, to avoid anger and being quarrelsome. When you leave the home, it's to avoid ego. So he says it's a moral reminder. As you come in, you see it and you say, okay, don't get angry. And as you leave, don't be an egomaniac, right? And so on and so forth, that it's a constant moral reminder. Interesting, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who was the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I think in the beginning of the 20th century. He says the following. He says, when you write something like these words of holiness on a mezuzah and put it on the doorpost of your home, what you've actually done is you've turned the house into a vessel of godliness. So it's like an object. You know, we have objects of mitzvah. We have a shofar, that's an object of a mitzvah. We have tefillin, a Torah scroll. He says, you want to turn your house, you can turn your house into an object of mitzvah as well. How do you do that? By writing the words of Torah on the doorpost of the home, by putting a mezuzah on. What that does is, he says, in a sense, it transforms the entire house into a mitzvah object. And Jews have been doing this for a long time. And I want to give you one further idea, which is actually from Josephus Flavius. He was a Jew who went over to the Roman side during the war against Rome in 2,000 years ago, and Josephus became a great historian, and he wrote a few books. One of the books is called Antiquities, the other is called The Wars of the Jews, another one's called Contra Appion, and Josephus Flavius is a valuable source of information about what Jews used to do and all of these issues. Anyway, so if you look at the slide here, first of all, there's a fragment of a mezuzah found in Qumran. It goes back approximately 2,100 or 2,200 years. Qumran is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. Qumran is a place near the Dead Sea. It's a very, very dry region of Israel. It's the lowest place below sea level on the planet, and because of various unique geological, geographic, and meteorological features of that place, parchments, which usually disintegrate after a few hundred years, were preserved for 2,200 years. And that's what we call the famous Dead Sea Scrolls. But amongst them were also found mezuzahs. Jews in Qumran at the Dead Sea 2,200 years ago were putting mezuzahs on their door. As you can see, it's a fragment, but it's there. And Josephus writes the following. They are also to inscribe the principal blessings they have received from God upon their doors, which declare the power of God and his goodwill toward them, that God's readiness to bless them may appear anywhere conspicuous about them. So it's an idea that to be aware that God's blessing to us, but there's another idea also some people mention, which is it's an identification process. Maharal talks about it as being something which designates this is the home of a proud, believing Jew. When I have a mezuzah on the door, it's a identification symbol as well. And that seems to be also a little bit implied in Josephus. And just for your fun, I have some mezuzahs here on the gates of the old city of Jerusalem, very large, beautiful mezuzahs. And of course, there are mezuzahs in homes where Jews used to live but no longer live. You can see niches in the doors. You go to Krakow and many towns in Europe where the Jews used to live and were decimated in the Second World War. You can see niches carved into the doorpost where there once was a mezuzah. And of course, most people are not familiar with the parchment as much as the case, because the case is what you see. The case is a very beautiful way of adorning the mitzvah and making it beautiful, and also to fit in with the decor of your home. If you look at we've got a carved pomegranate tree mezuzah from a kibbutz in the north of Israel. There's a designer mezuzah, Agam, which is a famous Israeli artist, mezuzah, olive wood and sterling silver, and yes, on the bottom right, you have a Lego mezuzah case. So anyway, a little bit of informational about mezuzah. Thank you for watching. This is Mordechai Becher with the Gateways Jewish Broadcasting Service. I was going to say Gateway to Judaism. In my book, I have called Gateway to Judaism, published by Art Scroll Press, and you can get it on Amazon. I have a chapter about mezuzah, so if you want to do further study, look in the chapter on my book about mezuzah, and at the end of the chapter I also have books for further reading, so I even promote other authors, completely selfless fashion. And so anyway, and there's further references, so if you'd like to look deeper into this subject, check it out, Gateway to Judaism, and looking forward for you to see me, does that make sense? Yes, whatever, on further episodes of Dimensions of the Daf. I am Mordechai Becher, and this is the Jewish Broadcasting Service. Thank you very much for watching.
We We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.